Kontakt. Standstill. Kontakt. Standstill. Kontakt. Standstill. 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 Standstill.
This one here was a dire situation that took place back in 1976. I was 18 years old. We were living in Boise, Idaho. We had an automobile auction facility that my father acquired like 2 or 3 years before this happened. And so the auto auction facility that we lived out in front of, that was 5 acres, it had a holding yard that was completely surrounded by a chain link 8.5 foot tall security chain link fence with 3 rows of barbed wire around the top. And we lived in the parking lot in a 3-bedroom single wide mobile home that was located 10 feet away on the outside. It would be the east side of this fence. So we doubled as security guards for the auction because we were in charge of hundreds of thousands of dollars of automobile inventory. There were consignments from car dealers in the local area, as well as bank repos, automobiles from the banks that we would auction off 1 day a week. And so in preparation for these auctions that we had on Wednesdays, we would accumulate quite a valuable inventory of automobiles out there. So we had to have a good fence that was impenetrable by thieves, that might be, getting in the yard and stealing parts and stuff. So this fence saw to it that nobody could get in the yard. I mean, it was unscalable by humans. There's no way they could get over this fence with those 3 strands of barbed wire that faced outward. They slanted outward up at the top. And so never had any problems there. If somebody needed to get in that yard, they would have to use bolt cutters to cut a hole in the fence. There's no way they could scale it. And as a backup, we had at that time 2 vicious Doberman pinschers. Now, they'd be a security problem in today's time and age, liability risk. So I don't think anybody would have dogs like this now, because if they were able to escape somehow from the yard, there would be problems, because these dogs were vicious. And there was only 3 of us that were able to approach these dogs and take care of these dogs that were able to approach them. And that was myself, my brother, and my dad at the time. So these dogs had the full run of the 5-acre yard in the evening hours, and then during business hours we had a nice kennel out there in the back corner for them, and my brother or myself or my dad would shut them up into that during the business hours, and then release them at night into the yard to guard the yard. So anyway, this mobile home that we had was sitting up on blocks. We didn't have any skirting at the time, as I recall. It was 3 steps up to the entryway on the front side, and then the back side that faced towards the holding yard where this fence surrounded it and the inventory and stuff was located about 10 feet away from the back side of this mobile home. So I'm telling all these details because it plays into the story. Now, at the time that we lived in that mobile home, my mom had a little dog that couldn't weigh 20 pounds. We figure it was half Afghan and half poodle. It was a stray that came to us a couple of years before, and never could find the owner. So this dog we named Moochie Ann became a loving part of the family, and my mom really was attached to that dog and loved that dog. So we had that dog at the time we lived out in front of the auction facility, and so anyway, that plays into the story too. So fast forward, it would have been springtime, because I was 18 years old and I still hadn't left the nest yet, so I was still living at home. And so this had to have taken place, I think, in the springtime, but it was definitely in 1976. My bedroom was located at the far end of this mobile home, this single wide mobile home we lived in, and I had slept in, and I mixed this into a dream. There was a long, drawn-out scream that suddenly took place. I mean, a blood-curdling, desperate scream. And the scream was coming from my mother, and I had mixed it in a scenario in a dream where she was being attacked by an attacker, but I couldn't see where she was at. And I was hearing the scream off in the distance, and I was trying to find her to protect her from this attacker. It was a desperate situation that I conjured up in this dream with a scream going on, and so I recall that, and then all of a sudden, boom, the scream stopped. Then I hear a second desperate, long drawn out scream coming from my mom, just blood curdling, and it jarred me out of the dream. I woke up. I'm laying there. My heart's beating fast. My adrenaline's already up because of the situation that just took place in that dream. And I am in the middle of a second long, drawn-out, blood-curdling scream coming from my mom. And I bolted out of that bed because I realized that it was taking place in real time and in real life. And I'm just picturing that she's being attacked. It's that desperate of a scream down on the far end of this mobile home. So I bolted out of the bed. I remember that. But as far as running down the full length of the mobile home through the hallway and then arriving at the back door that was wide open and the scream was coming from outside on the other side of the, on the back side of this mobile home, I don't recall running from one end of the mobile home to the other. I was just there in an instant, and I was standing at the doorway, looking down, and the scream was still taking place. And my mother was down there, outside, looking out towards the fence, and her little dog Moochie had somehow got underneath that fence and was pacing back and forth, desperately trying to get back to my mama from the other side of this fence. How she got under there, we never figured out, but she's on the other side of this fence, and she realizes, and I see on, halfway across this 5-acre lot, these 2 Doberman pinschers had spotted the situation, and they are on a dead run towards that dog, and they're going to tear that dog apart. Very protective of their yard, very territorial, so they're going to tear that. They're on a mission. They're going to tear my mom's little dog apart, and there's nothing she can do about it. That's the reason why my mom's there screaming, is she felt so helpless. She couldn't do anything to get that little dog out of that situation. And while I'm standing there at the end, the doorway, it seemed like time had stopped. I'm trying to assess the situation. My adrenaline's way up. What am I going to do? My mom can't see this take place in front of her eyes. It'll just tear her apart for a long period of time. She loved that dog so much, was so attached to it. So in an instant, it felt like I left my body. I had left my body. I was kind of hovering over my body, and it was an odd feeling. I left my body, and it was like there was an echoey voice on the outside of where I was at, but it was actually my voice. It was in my voice, but it was coming from the outside of myself, and it was saying something like, I'm not going to allow this to happen. This cannot happen. You got to do something about it. Was pretty close to what this voice was saying, and it was in my voice, my thinking voice. So all of a sudden I'm back in my body, and I'm looking down, and my mom's still in the middle of that scream. The dog's still pacing back and forth, and the dogs are approaching a little bit closer. And just in that instant, not going down the stairway, going across the crust. Oh, by the way, I was in my boxer shorts. I had no shoes on at the time. I had just got jarred from my sleep, so I'm scantily dressed. And the next instant, after I came back into my body, I am on the other side of that fence, and I'm looking towards my mom, and she's still screaming, and the little dog's pacing back and forth, trying to get back at her trying to get underneath that fence, right there at my feet. And it's like, what in the hell? And I took the time to look back behind me, and those dogs were like 35, 40 feet away from where we were at, but they're on a dead run. It's just a matter of a couple of seconds. They're going to be there on us. I immediately picked the dog up, mom's little dog Moochie, and had her in my arms and held her up over my head. And I'm looking at my mom through the fence, right in the eyes, and it's, I realize I'm going to have to launch that little dog up over that fence and into her arms to get out of the situation. And I look back, and the 2 Dobermans, they have this malicious look on their face. I mean, their teeth are showing and everything, but they're in almost a slow motion run. They're directed right at us, but they're almost stopped about 35, 40 feet away from us. So I turned back and I'm looking at my mom, and I know I only have one shot. And, I got to take my time. I got to make sure the little dog, I get her up over those 3 strands of that barbed wire up there, 8.5 feet above the ground, so that she doesn't get tangled up in that. And yet the dog needs to land on my mother's arm so it doesn't get injured, from that toss. And so I'm looking at my mom in the eyes. All of a sudden, boom, in an instant, it was like they were reanimated. The Dobermans are right there at my side, and they're jumping up, trying to get at that dog. And so I looked at her one more time in the eyes, and she was ready to go. And I threw that dog up over that fence and she landed right in my mother's, the safety of my mother's arms. And it was a miracle that I was able to get that dog up over the fence like that. And, my mom was able to catch her, from that high of a toss of that dog over that fence. Well, anyway, as soon as she landed in my mother's arms, those dogs are running back and forth and hitting at that fence, trying to get at that dog. I mean, that was their mission. They were going to tear that little dog apart right in front of my mother's eyes. And so it was a very perilous situation. And as soon as that dog landed in Mom's arms, she was like in shock. I mean, she was crying and had that dog in her arms, and she immediately bolted up the steps into the house and closed the door. And so here I am standing in my boxer shorts and bare feet, and I'm on, the inside of the holding yard there, and I can't get back up over that fence. There's no way to climb that fence. How I got on the other side of that fence, God only knows. I mean, either I was teleported or retransconfigured on the other side of that fence in that instant somehow, whether it would be by some capability I don't realize consciously that I have, but at that time, seeing the situation at hand, was able to conduct, or a divine intervention, I don't know. But I had to yell, "Hey, Mom, come and you got to let me out of the yard. I can't get back over the fence." And so she opened the door and went and got the keys and had to go around through the office of the auction building that we had, and come back out and open the side door for me to go back out and through and up into the house. So, I mean, our adrenaline's up, our heart's beating 1,000 miles an hour because of what just took place. And as soon as we got our breath, and my mom's still there crying and petting that little dog, she was so thankful that, the perilous situation was over with and that the dog was safe. I finally was able to talk to her about what had just taken place. I says, "Mom, thank God you screamed a second time, because the first time you screamed, I mixed it somehow in with the dream that you were being attacked in this dream, and I was searching for where the scream was coming from to protect you from this attacker. And then the screaming stopped, and then all of a sudden I hear the second blood-curdling scream from you, coming out of you, that, this desperate scream. But it's louder this time, and it jarred me out of my sleep. And so I was able to bolt out of the bed and somehow get down and see what was happening, what you were seeing there on the other side of the fence and the situation at hand. And but I want to know, how did I get on the other side of that fence, Mom? I mean, there's no way I could climb that fence and get up over those 3 strands of barbed wire, in my bare feet. And get up over without getting tangled up in that barbed wire, and get on the other side of the fence and be able to rescue your dog. I mean, and she says, I only screamed once. She says, when I went outside and had the dog and I turned my back, all of a sudden the dog somehow got under the fence, was on the other side of the fence there. And I saw that those Dobermans are going to come and tear that dog apart, and I couldn't get that dog out from the other side of that fence. I was screaming. I felt so helpless, and I was screaming. And that only took place for about a second or two, she said, and all of a sudden, boom, you were there on the other side of the fence, looking over at me and holding that dog straight up in your arms and ready to toss her up and over the fence like I did. And I said, but Mom, I definitely heard 2 screams. She says, no, it was like within a second or two. You were on the other side of the fence and managed to toss the dog back over the fence to safety in my arms, and that was it. And the only explanation I could possibly have was that we have those capabilities to distort time. Somehow time had stopped. Like I said, when I look back at the Dobermans, they were in a almost a dead stop, slow motion posture heading towards us. And that when I was set to throw that dog, my indicator was that you have to do it now, was that they were reanimated all of a sudden and were right there at us, trying to get at that dog. That I was somehow able to transconfigure myself or was teleported somehow by a divine force to the other side of that fence to manage that rescue. But it's something I have never forgotten. I mean, God, you know, and I think about it every other day. That springs back into my mind what a miracle that was. I've never forgotten it. I think it's some kind of a message to me that I think we have these capabilities. Somehow we lost those capabilities throughout the ages. But we have those capabilities, and at times we are able to somehow stir up those capabilities and utilize them during desperate situations. But I wanted to see if anybody out there has had a similar incident happen. You know, maybe in the message section of this post, you might post your story, or maybe post a video on it. But to me, it's something that sticks out in the out-of-body experience, and it seemed like this whole thing, you know, took place during the course of a minute, but actually it was in a fraction of a couple of seconds time to manage that rescue. If you've had any similar incidences, I'd like to hear about them. And like Kevin says, you know, in his videos, this really took place. This really happened, and I've never forgotten it. Now, I've had other time warp incidences, or where there was inexplicable lapses in time in my lifetime, but this one really sticks out because I managed the rescue of my mom's little dog. Now, sorry about rambling in this video, but I had to go through the details to tell my story, and hopefully I can get better at putting these videos together and telling some of the stories and some other things that are inexplicable or unexplainable that have taken place in my life, having to do with the paranormal, the paranormal, the paranormal, the paranormal, the paranormal, the paranormal.